Thank you so much for tuning in to our second session of Wisdom Wednesday. And today we're going to be having a question and answer in a relaxed conversational style with someone who's been in special ed for a long time. Those of us involved in special ed, whether we're from the school or whether we're on the parent side, can sometimes find it difficult to manage, to do all the things that we're required to do. And we've asked Nancy to come today and share some of the things she learned about navigating that system and making things better for the child, which is what we're all about. So Nancy, to start off, your name has been around in Oklahoma and in special education for a very long time. So can you tell us a little bit about your background in the world of special education?
Sure. My educational background really is, to start off with, I have a bachelor's degree in psychology with a minor in child development. And then I went on and received a master's in applied behavior studies from Oklahoma State University. And so I feel like my psychology background really has helped me in dealing with conflict and understanding human behavior, but also understanding children's behaviors too in this process of becoming into the futuristic aspect of becoming a director. But my very first job out of school was with the Child Service Demonstration Center, and it was out of Goosen Public Schools. And it was a great first year experience. And we called it the CSDC. That was the acronym for the Child Service Demonstration Center. But it did provide evaluation services for those small rural districts throughout that co-op aspect. But we provided training for special ed teachers back then on how to modify curriculum and how to support students with disabilities. So I learned a lot from my mentors there. And the training that we provided was extremely research-based practices and the best strategies that were out there. And I learned from the staff at the CSDC how important it was to dive deep into those research and evidence-based practices and figure out how to incorporate that in your teaching style, not only for behavior, but also with academics. And I don't know how many of you are out there that taught in the 1980s. And I remember those make and take it workshops. So give me a thumbs up if you remember the make and take workshops. Those are extremely popular because back then we didn't have computers when everything was done by hands. We'd even do calculators out of a Pringles can. We would be so creative back then. So if you remember those days, you know how creative special ed teaching had to be because we had limited resources. But unfortunately, I was only at the CSDC 1 year because we moved to the metro area, and I took a job with the State Department of Education, and I worked for the Oklahoma County Regional Education Service Centers. And back then, the RESCs, we had 21 centers across the state. And we were kind of that branch or that arm of the State Department of Education, so that we were kind of the boots on the ground. And we provided the monitoring of special education files. We even monitored the data and finance reports, which were actually done by paper pencil back then too. And we also provided those in-depth trainings for policies and procedures. And then as you go around the state, people ask different questions in different scenarios, hypothetically speaking, of course. And you would learn from those questions. And I would watch my mentors also presenting and answering those questions. So I learned from them. So I felt like my experiences at the RESCs, providing those kinds of trainings across the state and also doing the monitoring, provided me that background in compliance and assessment that prepared me to, one, become a director, and two, to learn how to take that really complex information like law or even assessment, and it prepared me how to break it down and communicate it in a more simple format. And so when I started with Edmond Schools, I had that as the foundational knowledge, but it also, by being the director, gave me that opportunity to build programs around those best practices and all those research things that I had been reading about, but I hadn't had any power or influence into creating them. So I really enjoyed that part of my career with Edmond Schools. But I retired from Edmond recently and took some time off and enjoyed family and friends. And I'm kind of a workaholic, so I kind of got bored. And so now I'm working back at the State Department of Education, going back to that, big picture view of policy and procedures. But again, I feel like my background as a director now gives me that knowledge, that background knowledge of the practical implementation of policies and procedures that's important when we're looking at creating new policies and procedures or guidance for school districts. So that's kind of my background.
That's great. Now I'm going to be asking Nancy a series of questions, but if you have any, if what she's talking about prompts you to ask any questions, please go to the Q&A box and put those questions in. And if time permits, we'll be answering those, or Nancy will be answering those. Okay, our next question, Nancy, is when parents bring concerns to the district, what are some tips in how to address those concerns of the parent in a thorough way?
Well, one thing I've learned in my years is from a really, really old saying, and I don't know who to give credit to, but it says you cannot control everything that happens to you, only your response to what happens to you. So learning to control my emotions and thinking to myself, if I say anything, is this going to help the situation? So I've learned that the most important thing when a parent comes to you is be an active listener. It's so important. And oftentimes parents are very upset when they come to, by the time they come to the director, they're pretty upset. And there's so many strong emotions surrounding their child, and it's their precious child, and they want to see some results. And so they're upset about something. So the greatest tip I can provide directors and administrators that are out there is to have a pad and pen ready, and start with the parent by saying, just tell me your story from the very beginning. Tell me what happened. And the entire time the parent's talking, start writing down every single thing the parent's saying. And now some of you've experienced this. I experienced this. Parents were so upset, they started cussing and yelling, and they even wanted me to fire people. And, you know, they're just so frustrated with the situation that all these raw emotions will come out. And so if they do start getting upset, I might immediately interrupt them and say, I first will acknowledge their anger. I can tell you're extremely upset, and I know this is really important that you provide me this information, and I want you to know I'm writing this all down. And so far, this is what I've got written down about what you've been saying about your concerns. Do I have this correct? And I'll go back over those concerns and make sure that I have it written down correctly. And then I ask them, you know, clarify those points for me, make sure I've got those facts, you know, correct. And then I ask them to continue on with telling me their concerns. And once I get all that down, but the interesting thing I have found, when I tell them I'm writing it down, they'll slow down, and I'll ask them if they continue to kind of keep talking fast. I'll say, can you please slow down? I'm really trying to get this written down. And when you ask people to slow down, it actually slows down their breathing. And they will try to calm down themselves. And also they won't cuss when you're writing it down. So know that's important. But also once you get it down, when they're through telling their story, then go back to all the concerns again, clarify that you've got the facts written down, but then start asking them, what would be your solution around this specific concern? You know, get their input. What would be your resolution to this? You know, ask them if they're open to additional solutions that the school team might be able to create and present. And oftentimes parents might tell me, you know, I really don't know what solution. I just want it fixed. My child's just not, maybe we're struggling and they see the child's regressing with their speech or articulation. I just want them to start talking better. And that's really but they don't see that happening, whatever the concern. But however, I have had parents come up with some wonderful suggestions, and I let them know how much we appreciate that input, because they know their child better than we do. And by obtaining that input, it's important. And so, but there are times when parents will say things to me that I'm not sure about. So it's good to clarify what they really mean and get behind what the whys are. So for example, a parent might say, I want full inclusion. I want my child, and this child may have, you know, a cognitive delay, may have significant behavioral issues. So I begin to say, so tell me why. Tell me, what do you want your child to gain from being fully included in the regular classroom? Give me that information. So finding out the whys behind what a parent wants is really key to determining those solutions and options later on. But as a director, I warn you, never try to give solutions to the parent. At this time, you're just actively listening, and you're taking in information and getting their concerns, getting their input to solutions and resolutions, but let the parent know this is truly an IP team decision. I'm not the ruler of decision making. I may be the director, but it truly is an IEP team process, and make that real clear to the parent. And then once the conversation is through with that conversation, I clarify dates and times that they can meet with me, and we can set up a meeting. And I let the parent know I'm going to get back with you as soon as possible. And then I thank the parent for bringing the concerns to me, because I let them know we're not perfect and we need your feedback in order to improve, to be the best district, around. And that's what always my goal is. And I want them to know how much I will verbally praise them for bringing it to my concern and letting them know I appreciate them. And then I'm going to reach out to my school team and match up those dates. And I get back to this parent regarding our confirmed IEP date. And then prior to the meeting, I'm going to set up a staff meeting with my staff to go over those parent concerns.
Okay, Nancy, when you're addressing your school staff, do you have tips on how you can get them to really think deeply and outside the box on difficult concerns?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I get hold of the staff about these concerns. So I'll email them initially with what I've written down. And I also will include the parents' solutions or resolutions to resolve this problem. And at the time of the email, I'm just asking them to get back with me dates and times to get back with the parent. But I let them know I need you to look these concerns over, because we're going to staff before the meeting and we're going to go over these concerns. And so at the staffing, it's important as a director for me to, again, do active listening with my staff and listen to their concerns, but use the list that the parent has given you and ask the staff to rank order these concerns, from one being the easy items that we know we can agree with the parent, that we know we can implement this right away. This is something they're concerns, and this is one of their solutions that they think would resolve it. Yeah, we can do that. That's easy. I wish we had thought of that before. That's a great idea. So that's going to be a number one. And then we rank order it down to where we might be disagreeing with the parent. And we're going to leave that one as the very last item as we rank order. And then sometimes it's just a miscommunication between our staff and the parent, and other times it's a major barrier. And those major barriers are those items on the very end of our list. We really want to brainstorm those ideas and options. So we need to write them down along with the parent solution. I had a member of my staff, her name was Megan, and she taught me a very important thing that I've kept doing, was to put things up on the board, or if you have Post-it notes, or if you're one of those districts who's lucky enough to have a smart board and technology in your conference room, get that computer up and have somebody typing the notes. But it's a brainstorming idea. Every idea is not too crazy. And everybody's idea needs to be heard. And by writing things down and everybody's looking at it, it keeps us all focused on that. And there's kind of a free flow of thought going on, which is really critical when you want creative thinking. It really builds it, because sometimes when you're in conversations, people aren't really listening. But when it's up on the board, we're kind of, oh, they've already thought of that. But hey, because of that thought, I'm going to add to that. And then it also values that diverse perspective that every professional, from special ed teachers to speech paths to OTs, PTs, school psychs, and I want to say even the principal, we want them in the staffing. And as a director, I try to be the one asking questions. I try not to create the ideas, because it needs to come from them regarding how to solve this problem. And oftentimes, as a leader in this conversation, it's also important that you don't want to allow that conversation to become a negative turn regarding personal attacks. And you want to get everybody to focus back on the child, focus back on the solutions. And then as everyone puts the ideas on the board, then we can determine which direction we want to go on the specific topics of the concerns with the parent. And then we're going to create a proposal to present to the parent at the meeting. And when leaving that staffing, we have buy-in from everybody, or at least a consensus. Please know, sometimes we disagree in-house as school people. Sometimes we disagree, but we need to come to consensus, because we've got to move in a certain direction. But we take your concern that this may not be the right direction into mind, so that if the parent also agrees that this is not right way, we might shift and go to your idea in the parent meeting.
Okay, Those are excellent tips. What about when you get something pretty creative and you feel like you have to get the administrators on board with it and you're concerned they might not be, maybe because it's new or something that's never happened before? Do you have any tips for people on how to get those administrators on board?
That's one of the reasons why I have them in the staffing, because if they see that it's the teachers coming up with these ideas or the related service personnel, the OTs and PTs, then they know it's not just me. Because if I walked in and I said, okay, I'm going to tell everybody this is what we're going to do, then the principal is going to get defensive because the teachers are not on board. And principals, in their mindset, their whole job is to protect the teacher. They want what's, and I don't want to say that all administrators want what's best for kids, number one, but they also want to keep their teachers happy. And so if there's a new idea, they need to see there's buy-in from everybody. And when they see that, they're more likely to do that. But I also, after that staffing, I will also meet one-on-one with the principal after the staffing alone. So the principal can speak freely without any of the staff around. And they can add additional concerns, just the two of us, to tell me, hey, Nancy, you didn't think about this that could happen. Or, hey, we've got a personnel issue on this, or we have a cost factor here, or some other issue that I may not have thought of, or I wasn't aware of a perspective. So that may change my idea, or I may be able to talk the principal through that process. But part of being a director is building trust with your principals too, and getting them on board. And I also try to take the load off the principal by saying, I'm going to lead this IP meeting. If you need to step out, that's okay. I'm going to support what's going on, but I need you there. I know you need to step out for a second, but come right back, because principals do that because there's something that's happened in the building. They've got to step out. And then I also let them know I'm going to pay for the sub for this IP meeting so we can talk about it. But I also let the principal know I'm going to pay for the training. I'm going to pay for a lot of this so that, I'm going to support you and I'm going to be here to help you with this process. You're not alone in this. I'm here to help. And I let him know if the parent's in disagreement, then we need to set up another meeting. He needs to be okay with doing that. But again, I'll pay for the subs if I feel like, because if you try to do an IP meeting after school or before school, people are thinking about going home or they're thinking about getting classes started. So if you've got a major conflict that it's going to be difficult to come up with a resolution, you do need to get subs to spend that time. And I know it sounds that it might be too difficult to have that lengthy of a conversation, but it's important to build those trust and relationships with that parent up front in order to get these creative juices going and to come up with those options, because parents need options to choose from and be open to that. And it breaks down those barriers when parents see options are being, that we're trying. It's not like we're saying, no, we're thinking of other ways this could be resolved. And often principals are on board with that. And it's seeing that their teachers are okay with it. And that's not a push down kind of thing. It is their idea, their buy-in, and they're willing to support it especially when I'm going to financially support that new idea.
I'm going to ask you a question now that's sort of a takeoff of that one, that sometimes it's a challenge for districts in building new programs. And so you may have maybe a team has a child with very unique needs, and they really don't fit in with the current programs that are established in the district. And do you have any tips for SPED directors on how to get the school team or the administrators to think outside the box in how to change programming from what they currently provide?
I highly recommend a pilot. That is the way to kind of get things started. It also helps you build it in a practical implementation, and you work out all the kinks and problems by piloting it instead of trying just to throw it all out there and hope it works. So the first step in developing a pilot program is, number one, you got to read and find out what the research says about this child's unique needs. See if there's any evidence-based practices or methodologies or strategies that might support this child better. Find out if there's other districts in the state or maybe you even need to look outside of the state of Oklahoma who are already practicing these research-based strategies, and talk to as many people as you can, maybe that have already gone through this process. And if not, you start into it. And the first thing you want to do is try to identify the criteria that would be around children who meet this unique characteristics. And we know the problem is our current programs are not meeting this child's need. So I would pull the special ed teachers together, and one of the first things I do is survey them to say, if this was your own biological child and your child was not making gains in this current special ed program, what would you want? Would you be okay with your child staying in this special ed program? And if not, then what would you guys feel about that? And so get that conversation going about, if this was your own child, how would you feel? And then start sharing these evidence-based practices and this research that I have found, and talk about the research. And then say, do you have other children across the district? I bring a select group of teachers that I feel like have children in their class. And we would discuss not names, but characteristics. And again, walking through that process. The second step is really that buy-in. So I'm going to ask for a volunteer. I'm not going to force any teacher to start a new program. I'm going to ask for one person, but they need to know the caveat is that they're going to be, once they go through a year of this, they're going to be the one to provide training and mentoring as we begin to build more programs like this. And also, when I send a teacher like this to training to learn about these evidence-based practices, I never ever send them alone. They will have to go with either an OTPT, speech pathologist, school psychologist, and I really would like to send the building site administrator so that they understand why we're building this program, because I have to have buy-in from them as well. And if you're a larger district, send someone from your special services staff, because it's important that they're involved in this process. So training's so important. And then the next step is a data collection process. You want it simple, not complex. You don't want anecdotal notes type of collection, because, you know, saying you have a good day might mean something to somebody else. So part of this research of knowing whether or not this program's working or not is we're going to have to collect data. We have to know the effectiveness of this program. So that's a conversation in itself, is sitting down how to create data so it's built around our IEP goals and objectives, and that they're broken down very specific, very explicit in the definitions and the specific tasks, that so that anyone who picked up that data sheet would know what to do. And that would mean like our aides or paraprofessionals that are in the classroom, if we rotate them so they're learning how to do this, because we want to make data-driven decisions making process in creating this pilot. And also seeing, is it working? Is it making these child's unique needs that weren't being met in this other program? Now, is it working in this new program? And then we also take, you have to have specific cut scores so you know that the child has actually mastered this, and then also build in generalization skills. And I think it's important that even for children with more significant disabilities, that the data is broken down in very small, minute steps so the parent can start seeing some progress in certain areas. So that's one thing. So data is very important. And one of the other steps that you need to take into is really an evaluation time. Sit down at semester, have a conversation with everybody that's been involved. And then again, just like around April, sit down again and have another conversation with that teacher and all the related services, including the principal, about what worked, what didn't work. And then after implementing those strategies, go back and review the criteria that you first developed and say, have we changed any of that? And then kind of firm that criteria up, and then start searching out in other buildings of other children that might meet that criteria, and involve everybody in that process. And then again, it becomes a volunteer process, is adding another program and then adding another, and soon you've got multiple programs meeting the needs of kids with unique needs.
Yeah, sounds like it's interesting, but time consuming. Like it doesn't happen overnight.
It does not happen overnight.
Right. So if any of you out there have any challenges that you're facing that you would like to ask Nancy about, maybe you've come up against a roadblock in your process of doing the things she's talking about, please share that maybe as a hypothetical about a potential challenge or roadblock in the question Q&A, so Nancy can help you think through that with an answer, or at least her thoughts on it. Again, in the same area, talking about developing programs, do you have any tips for parents? Parents come in and they advocate for services for their child that the needs of their child don't seem to fit with the existing programs the school is offering. How do you think parents might best approach school districts with that?
Well, that's the first step, is approaching us, because sometimes parents are scared, and because conflict can be scary and it's a little intimidating for some parents to even communicate with district leaders. But I really do encourage all parents to not avoid communicating with the director of special services, because they are your greatest advocate. So start there first. If you've already tried talking to the teacher and things are not going well, and then you try talking to the principal at the site, that's not going well, reach out to that director of special services. So I'm encouraging you to do that. And I also encourage you in your conversation with the director to always start off with something positive. Tell the director what's working. And I think the school needs to know that. And they do know that and also let them know you are the greatest advocate for your child, but so is the special ed director. They really do want what's best for your kiddo. And then start working on those difficult issues. But I do recommend to all parents, because it is nerve-wracking to talk about what you want to get across. And sometimes, just like we were doing in our staffing, writing everything down, I encourage parents to write down your concerns and go from that as your bullet points as you're talking. And that'll keep you on target, and you won't forget anything that you've been, sit down with your spouse or a family member or someone that you trust to help you create your concerns. And then email it to the director in advance of calling them and saying, hey, just let me know a convenient time that we can speak over the phone, but here are some of my concerns. And when you have a convenient time, could you give me a call? And try to give real specific examples of what you think are the problem, of why your child's not making progress in their current program, and ask about possibilities, or what other options are there for creating new programs or ways to build it in within the current program.
Okay, excellent. One of the things that's happened in Oklahoma and all across the country over the last 5 to 7 years, I'm just guessing, looking back, has been this concept of how we treat discipline, that we look at, or how we treat behavior. We used to look at it as just disciplining that behavior. And now we're getting a lot of new information and evidence-based practices on understanding the concepts of behavior services as opposed to just disciplining a behavior. Would you have any tips for helping principals understand that difference?
Really, the resources that are out there, that is, well, one is looking at things at the end of something is a reaction. So looking at the behavior at the end is a reaction of suspension, and that's disciplining the behavior. But being proactive and getting in front of it is really what we want to do, and how to treat the behaviors. Because if we don't treat the behaviors, we're going to continue to have this discipline, the suspension, and we've already have years of data to show suspension alone does not work. So if it's not working, we need to figure out other means of curbing behavior. And there is a multi-tiered system of support that's an umbrella term for both behavior and academics. And having an MTSS, or that multi-tiered system of support for behavior, can really change the culture of a building. And our State Department of Education has folks that are over the statewide tiered system of support, and Kristen Perez Rickles is one of them, and also Dr. Gary Duhon from OSU are some of the greatest experts in this area to help schools to move toward implementation of something like this, of being more creative. And one of the things principals might want to look at is, do we have some type of core curriculum or core expectations that we're teaching all students, not just students that are getting in trouble, but every single kid in the building understands this is our explicit expectation of behaviors, and that teachers are all using a common language that everybody understands, and including other environments, from the PE teacher to the librarian to the cafeteria workers to the staff, the secretaries and staff in the office, that we are all taught these same expectations and behaviors. And that's part of MTSS, is having that foundation, that tier 1 model. And then you have layers of support for those kids who are not quite getting that core instruction that everybody's getting. And then creating those behavior interventions within that wraparound model, because it's everything that you're building within the MTSS model is a layer, and it's in addition to, you don't take anything away. Everybody's exposed to all those. And some kids just need more. I remember Dr. Singleton told me it's kind of like looking at the number of floaties a kid needs to stay afloat and keep their head above the water. Some just might need 1, some might need 5, and some might need 20 to keep their head above the water. So with kids with behavior issues, they might need more layers of support to keep their head above the water. But those are great things. And also, if principals will take their suspension data and do an analysis of it, and let's say fighting's the #1 issue, what can we do differently with fighting? Instead of suspending these kids, maybe we could do a conflict resolution, teaching these 2 students how to deal with this conflict. Because sometimes kids don't know verbally how to work through a conflict or work through a coping aspect of a problem that they may have with a girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever it might be that the fight occurred. So those kinds of techniques need to be introduced and get in front of these behaviors instead of being reactive and suspending the students.
Okay. In the context of behavior, sometimes we see kids melt down or kind of lose it. And what recommendations do you have for schools on crisis training?
Right. When it comes to crisis with more severe behaviors, and I know a lot of districts do this already, you send staff or at least someone in your district to a nationwide training on restraint and seclusion. Crisis Prevention Institute is one of the trainings we send. It's CPI training. But when you go to that training, the majority of the training is about de-escalation techniques. It's about utilizing verbal techniques. It's not about really restraining. I mean, there is a piece of that training that involves the restraint aspect, but a big portion of this is how to talk with a student, how to use your body language to not escalate the situation, and how to get in front of that. And so I highly recommend, in our district, we actually paid for our staff to become a trainer of trainers, so that we had specific people in our buildings that would go out and train all the principals and train all the special ed teachers and train all the teaching assistants, because it is all about training when you're in a crisis situation. You can't rely on just dealing with the crisis from the get-go. You need to have a safety plan in place. You need to have, if you don't have a school psychologist, I highly recommend that you reach out to universities who have experts in this area to give you some advice and some supports. And the State Department also has, like I said, Kristen Perez-Rickles. She's amazing. She's got a lot of knowledge and expertise in this area. But you want to send as many people through crisis training as possible in order to teach everybody how to respond when this crisis does occur with a child who's extremely physically aggressive or has significant behavior issues.
Okay. Nancy, during your 34 years, did you learn some hard lessons? Things that happened that you learned from and you thought, well, that didn't go well, I would do that differently next time. In things that you would give cautionary advice to either districts or parents?
Well, the first thing is, don't dig in your heels and say no. You know, that's probably the biggest lesson I ever learned. And, you know, going to court or filing a due process should be the last resort that the parent does or that the district does. You know, there's thousands of dollars spent on court fees and attorney fees. So that, you know, you have to weigh the cost of that lawsuit over the various options that we could have attempted to help this child and use those monies in a different manner. You know, I might say this like a broken record, but keep that focus on the child and be creative with options to offer to the parent. I think that's the greatest lesson I learned through everything is The first part of my career, from the very first year, I was in a lawsuit and had several lawsuits. And so I thought, I don't like this. I don't like conflict. And I want to get in front of this. And what can we do to make our programs better? So don't get stuck on, and school districts as well as parents, don't get stuck on one thing. Parents don't get stuck on one thing that, like you want a one-on-one aid and you're not going to do anything, but you got to have this one-on, so think about other things that can, what's the worst thing that can happen with your child if they don't have an adult with them right then. Also, but what are the harmful effects if they have adult with them all day long, that they may become too independent on that adult aid support. So come up with a compromise about, things like a one-on-one aid. Maybe it's not throughout the instructional day. Maybe it's just access to an adult on specific things where the child's struggling to be independent, and work and allow that child to be more independent on the things they're already doing, and be open. School districts need to be open to parent suggestions. I think that's where we get in this conflict, is we just start digging in our heels and we're not listening and open to insights that the parent may have about their child, and that the parent's not open to how we're seeing the child, because they are two different environments from home to school. And so the school may have a different perspective, and that's okay. So always be open to try new things. And most of the time it's poor communication, honestly, and that both parties need to have that common shared goal, which is the success of the student. And honestly, nobody knows how hard it is to be a parent of a child with a disability unless you are a parent of a child with a disability. And even then, each child with a disability is totally unique and totally different. And so you still may not be able to relate to that parent. And no parent can really understand how hard it is to be a teacher these days with a full classroom of children with disabilities, unless you've really taught before, or you currently are a special ed teacher. So we have different perspectives that we may never truly understand, but we do need to come back to that table and have that common shared goal, which is the child, that shared goal that we all realize we're human. We all make mistakes on both sides of the table, but it's so important that we own our mistakes and say, we made a mistake and we do want to correct this and do the right thing for the child.
Okay, we see this over and over in our center where, and I think what happens sometimes, I think you're right, a lot of it is just communication. That's why we spend so much time doing communication training, because the way a parent comes in, they may be frustrated and upset, and the way they present their concerns sometimes can scare school staff or make school staff clam up, and rather than address those concerns, they go unaddressed. And then the anger escalates, and it does. If you can bring it back to the child, and like you said, not focus on what somebody initially thinks will work to solve the problem, but what options are available to help with that problem. Because we do know that requesting a one-on-one paraprofessional is the #1 request of parents, but I think it's because they know about it and they don't really know what the other options are. And so it's really helpful if you can, as you've said repeatedly through here, try not to be reactive and to listen to what they're saying. I think you've been the model for our crucial conversations. And everything you've said, all of the training that we give, it's repeating, restating, reframing. It sounds like, a lot of hoochie-doochie behavior, terminology, but it really is what you've discussed, all of those steps, and just really trying to figure out what's going on and what can solve the problem of that child. Yeah. So you're very wise in those areas. Anything else that you can think of?
It's really having that mutual respect and trust, and it's building relationships. It really is spending time, and also schools, we need to start looking at what are those positive, heartwarming stories that we can share with parents. So many times parents, all they hear from us is the negative, especially with children who have behavior issues. Mm-hmm. So we need to start IEP meetings with those wonderful, positive, sweet stories to tell parents. They need to hear that from us. They need to know we're in love with their child and how much we think so much about them. But no doubt there's some struggles with this kid's behaviors, but we still love them. And these are the wonderful things we want to share, and the parents need to hear that. So that's another thing.
Okay. What strategies or experience have you had when you're faced with working with parents of children with disabilities that are difficult, critical, and demanding? How do you cope with that?
Yeah, I think the parents they feel like they have to be demanding to make sure that their child gets all their rights. And that's not necessarily true. However, I do understand that raw emotion that we talked about earlier, and it comes out differently in different personalities of different parents. But there are parents who can be overly critical of the teacher, no matter how hard the teacher's trying. The parent is criticizing every little thing. And it goes back to what I just said about this child. We as teachers may be sharing too many negative things. And as a parent, they may be sharing too many critical things of the teacher, and we're not getting anywhere. So one of the things I've learned over time is I usually know about a parent that's extremely difficult and demanding because they've come to me. So I've been in an IEP meeting trying to resolve situations, but what I will do is actually follow this parent into the subsequent IEP meetings, because I want to make sure, are things going well? And the parent appreciates that. I'll just show up and say how things have been going. And then I try to build a relationship with that parent, but I also go and observe the child so that I know a little bit about the child and their strengths and weaknesses. And I try to help continue to facilitate that conversation between, because the teacher is having to hear this criticism every day, and then that begins a rub. And so I feel like my job is to come in and kind of be that. I know you provide that service through CERC as an IEP facilitator, but I try to do that in-house as a district, come in and try to be the objective person, because I'm not emotionally involved. I'm not being criticized every day by the parent, but the teacher is. So I come in and try to provide that redirection of the conversation if it becomes a personal attack, because that's usually what happens. And I just encourage parents to kind of rephrase things instead of, you never communicate with me. Ask the teacher, I was just wondering what you prefer in communication. Do you like phone calls? Do you like emails? What types of things do you like? So you're really giving a teacher a choice. You're not saying, you're not letting them know that they never communicate, but you're letting them know in a kind way that you do want communication. And you're getting their input to say, oh yeah, emails are easier for me. I like that. Oh, wonderful. And then let the teacher know, these are just the things I want information on. And then that way you can kind of break down the conversation. Because honestly, we go back to this again, it's those conversations that are being misunderstood. We're not listening to each other. And when you get in those critical conversations that become mean and hateful, then no one's listening. So you're not being productive. And so it's important to step back and go back to that common goal, as we talked about earlier. So it's repeating what we've already talked about, but that's how you deal with someone who's demanding and critical, is spending a lot of time up front and then building that relationship over time.
Right. We do provide IEP facilitations for anyone who feels they've exhausted their ability for whatever reason. I don't think it means that there's something wrong that you couldn't do it. Sometimes even the best communicator, there will be factors involved. So I know a lot of directors develop those skills. How long do you think it took you, Nancy, to really develop those skills where you didn't think things so personally?
It took a long time, but I also
33 years.
Pretty much. And I went through your training, so that helped a lot. I encourage everybody to go through Joanne's training, because you learn a lot about yourself even. And again, that learning to know you can't control stuff, you accept your response to it is so helpful. To know, my response going to help this situation, or it's going to make it worse? And that's what you need to continue to ask yourself as you. And I found it's very helpful to listen and be active listening and rephrase what the parent is asking, because I may be processing it wrong. And the parent is saying it to me, but I'm not understanding what their concern is. So it's important to get that clarity.
Another issue that's come up a lot in special education is the idea of progress monitoring, looking at a student's progress, whether it be their behavior, whether it be their academics. And so why is it essential for districts I mean, there's a real push from the State Department, but can you explain to parents and to districts why it's really important to keep up with progress monitoring?
Yeah, a lot of people like to talk about progress monitoring as a formative assessment, and like the state assessment is a summative. Formative means that, these are measures that are real sensitive to change regarding the student's response to our curriculum or interventions that we're providing. And it allows for really timely adjustments to our intervention or to our instruction. So it's important to have that. And people use the analogy of like a doctor versus an autopsy. So, when someone's dead, there's nothing I can do about their illness. I'm just actually diagnosing what they died of, as a summative assessment. Basically, it's just telling me what they didn't learn all year long. Where a formative assessment's like a doctor treating someone, they're diagnosing quickly. I have an assessment that it's sensitive to determine what your area of deficit or physical illness is, and I can treat it immediately, and I give you the treatment, and then I progress that treatment. And if it's not working, I readjust the treatment or the dosage or whatever I'm doing as a doctor. Same thing as an educator. We need those formative assessments to be on top of it, and we need the assessments to be sensitive to change. That's why a lot of experts encourage you to use those curriculum-based measurements, and there's all kinds out there, from Dibbles to Ames Webb. There's a variety of curriculum-based measurements that are wonderful to use. And that does let us know. And I do like having the curriculum-based measurement as an independent measure, because we have built-in assessments within our curriculum. And sometimes that says the kid's doing great, but an outside independent measure like a curriculum-based measurement also tells me those skill deficits. So I like to have both. And it does help me as a teacher or as an educator to adjust my instruction and interventions timely. And it also helps me break down those individual skills from reading into those 5 areas and get real specific. And I do want that weekly knowledge and information of instruction. That's why those progress monitoring assessments are so important. And they are normed actually kindergarten through 8th grade in a lot of those published curriculum-based measurements. So it's important.
And how would districts learn about that if they didn't know? With the State Department, universities, yes. Where would they go to get information about how to do the progress monitoring?
Again, Kristen Perez Rickles, she's head of our OSDE, the Oklahoma Tiered System of Support, and she has a great knowledge and a great team, and she's working in collaboration with Dr. Gary Duhome from OSU. And there's also Dr. Scott Singleton from UCO. He's got great knowledge about MTSS. And so those are people you want to reach out to and find out, how would I get started? How do I do this? And they would recommend you actually do universal screening of all your students 3 times a year, and then target those students who fall at risk on that universal screening. Because there's kind of 4 components, sometimes 5 if you're looking at fidelity, which you do need to look at, but it's that universal screening, progress monitoring, utilizing research-based interventions or evidence-based interventions, and making your decisions based on the data, and doing some fidelity checks. But those are the foundational issues regarding the MTSS models.
I would just throw in here just something that came to my mind is the Supreme Court case of Andrew that came back to the 10th Circuit. We've redefined what FAPE looks like. And it used to just be some educational progress, and now it's defined some educational progress in light of the child's individual circumstances. But if you're having to show educational progress, it won't just be grades. It's going to be progress monitoring on the goals that you've written. So it really does become important if you're trying to defend yourself. And hopefully we don't. I mean, we're trying really hard to do early interventions so that it doesn't come down to legalities. But at the end of the day, you want to do it to educate children, but you also want to do it as protection. Would you agree with that, Nancy?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Definitely. You never know when it's going to happen, right?
Right.
Yeah, right. Is there a way to keep track of progress in a meaningful way that's also manageable?
as I mentioned, some of those curriculum-based measurements are actually online, and it pulls all that data for you, and you can actually analyze the data through those computerized programs like Ames Web and Dibbles. They have those. But in larger districts like with Edmond, we actually hired Dr. Kim Hastings, actually, and her job was to analyze that data. She even did it for not only special ed, but for general education students, and she provided graphs and everything over a 3-year period so we could see what specific skills. And it really helped us the year during the pandemic when everything was shut down in 2020. We didn't have state assessments, but we could lean on our curriculum-based measurements to say, even through the pandemic, did our students make progress? And we were able to show that. But we were also able to identify what grade levels and what skill areas that we needed to address in a more meaningful way, because we did see some loss of skills in just those smaller skill sets. But that data really drives not only special ed decision making, but also the general education instruction. And that's another thing that's wonderful about this whole MTS model is you're really preventing children from having learning disabilities by getting in front of them. And the data helps you see which child is making progress. And I tease teachers about the old days of having, you do your whole group instruction, then you break the kiddos up in groups. And in the old days, you had your blue birds, your brown birds, and we jokingly say, I'm just joking. If there's any parents online, we're joking that we had our buzzard group, or something like that. And I'm just joking. But it also helped us have flexible groups, that a kiddo was not just stuck in one group all year long. The data actually showed me, hey, he's doing so much better with phoneme segmentation. I'm going to move him over to my fluency group, because he doesn't need this intervention anymore, or she. And so it makes it a flexible group, and kids are being moved around. So they never know why I'm being pulled up to this horseshoe table for whatever reason, because it keeps moving and it's not a constant group of children.
Yeah, that's interesting. Right now, after the pandemic, at least through calls for our office, we see that people seem extra strained to me. Parents are kind of at the end, teachers are kind of at the end. I mean, people's nerves are really frazzled, and I don't know what it is. I think we blame everything on the pandemic, but whatever, there's an increased kind of anxiety in people. And what would you recommend for districts for doing self-care for special education teachers or any educator to prevent burnout?
I have seen a change from teachers saying education was always a passion of mine. It was always fun. I always loved seeing the children learning. It's just been a community kind of thing. People surrounded their schools and supported their schools. And during the pandemic, I don't know what happened, but we did have, as we talked earlier, parents becoming critical of teachers, and no longer were teachers the hero. There was some criticism being given. And I understand that we're not perfect as educators, but that criticism has really bared down on the teachers. And so the only way to turn that around is start looking at the positives that teachers are doing, highlight what teachers are doing well. And at Edmond, we had different consultants that were over different programs, and we would meet together. And our consultants would go out and take pictures of like a bulletin board or something that they would create. I'm just using bulletin board as an example, but they would take pictures of things that they were implementing in a creative way and come back and share with everybody and say, look how amazing Miss So-and-so is. And teachers like that. Oh, you like my idea, and oh, you're sharing it with other teachers and professionals. Oh my gosh, that's wonderful. And so teachers need those boosts. And if you're a parent listening, our teachers do need the boost. Just if you can find something positive to let them know how grateful you are of what they've done with your child, because the criticism does wear down on people, and it does begin to get them to say, I guess I'm not appreciated. What I'm doing is not working. And they feel like they're working night and day, honestly, during this pandemic, and they felt like they tried really hard. And hopefully we can get back to that as a community, people working together for the common goal of children, but it's tough. And so I was really lucky in Edmond. We had outstanding teachers, and we tried to provide that support through training and just that one-on-one support, because I would have teachers call me and in tears. And so I would just talk to them through that process and let them know how much I care about them. So it's that, again, building relationships with your teachers and to prevent that burnout, because it's hard, even as a director, because there's directors out there going, hey, it's not just teachers, it's me too, you know? And so, you know, so really what's kept me in this field for so long, because that's a lot of times people ask me that, you know, besides keeping your staff upbeat and positive, what's kept you in this field for so long? And I think it's really just the challenge of wanting to make things better, you know, because, you know, we've come a long way. And I think sometimes we forget that. If those of us that have been in the field a long, long time, we've seen how special ed has evolved over time, and it has gotten better when you see the overall picture. Can it get better? You betcha. We want it to continue to improve and get better, but we need to acknowledge the changes that have improved over time that's good for children with disabilities. And then we also need to challenge one another to create programs that are best practices and move in that direction.
Okay. Well, thank you, Nancy. I appreciate you sharing your life with us, your passions, and the work that you did for children. Are there any questions that anyone would have that they could put in the question and answer box that Nancy might want to answer? Do you have any hypotheticals or things that you're struggling with, or that you have a neighboring district that's struggling with? Because we'd like to be here. I'm sure you could call Nancy at the State Department if you feel like what you would share would be too personal, whether you be a parent or a school person. Know that at CERC, we do provide services of early intervention, and we don't look down on districts that contact us for an IEP facilitation, because there are times when the strain and stress of an IEP meeting is just more than people can kind of cope with. And our facilitators tell us that when they go in, they're able to identify the positives and keep it positive and moving on. And it's very helpful to the parties to work through to come up with an IEP or the ideas in the IEP that people can agree with. And so don't hesitate, whether you're a parent or a district, if you're feeling a large amount of struggle in dreading a meeting, give us a call. Our toll-free number is 888-270, I don't know, 0028. No, is that right? 26. Okay, it's 888. I hadn't said it in a while. 888-267-0028. So, well, in closing, Nancy, I'm just thrilled that you came out of retirement to work back at the State Department. Every year I see a list of directors that are retiring, and I'm really sad that we're losing that depth of knowledge. We have many, many new directors, and that mentoring, I know through their professional organization, they do mentoring. The directors who have been there longer mentor the newer directors, and it's a great program, the support that they get. Parents too have support through the Oklahoma Parent Center, through Sooner Success. If you're a parent on here and you don't know how to access parent support, give us a call. We'd help you with that also. So thank you for being with us here today, Nancy, and thank you all for attending, and we'll see you next month for our third Wisdom Wednesday. Thank you.